This year in 2024, I read a lot of really good books. So in this video, I'm going to compile a list of a lot of the books that I read this year, and we're going to tier rank them and see how they stack up against one another. The first book we're going to look at here is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This was the second book of hers that I read this year, and I read it fairly recently, so I think I'm pretty well locked in how I feel about it. I think this was just like a nice, solid B tier book. It was fine. The way Gillian Flynn writes, I think it worked a lot better in Gone Girl than it did for me in Sharp Objects. It's just very dark and just, kind of makes you feel like you need a shower afterward, which could be a good thing or it could also be a bad thing. I'm not really sure yet, so it just slots in there at B. Next is Beyond Redemption by Michael Fletcher. This is a really, really dark fantasy story that I think I had fun with, but at the same time, again, I wanted to shower afterwards. It was rough, but I do think it belongs here in B tier. It's in a very similar spot as Sharp Objects, where like I think it's very good and I enjoyed parts of it, but at the same time, it was like, I need to go read a comedy now. The only horror novel I read this year was The Horror by David Sodergren, and I loved it. This thing is gnarly nasty and definitely A tier for me. It shouldn't be that good, but it follows this old lady as her house is getting somewhat repossessed and supernatural crazy stuff happens and people get unalived in really awful ways, and it's so much fun to read. So do with that what you will. Next we have The Housemade by Frida McFadden. Yeah, we are all over the place with some of these books, but The Housemade for me was fun. Just like a really easy thriller to take out, so I think we'll throw this in A tier right behind The Horror. Next we have, and now we're starting to get into the fantasy that I read this year. Next we got Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, and this book was so surprising. It was a lot better than I thought it would be. Let's put it that way. It's epic, and it takes a lot of your traditional fantasy tropes and kind of turns them on their head. I was very pleasantly surprised with what Brian Lee Durfee did here in Forgetting Moon. I think this one goes top of A tier. I just was so pleasantly surprised by it because I don't know what I expected going into it, but it was awesome. Then we've got Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. And this is the first book in his Bound and the Broken series. And I think it showed promise. It's very interesting because I didn't thoroughly enjoy it. In fact, I think this is a C tier one for me. You can just tell that Ryan Cahill hadn't written very much, and I think this was his first published novel, and it suffered in that respect. But there's enough promise that I've now started up the next book in the series of Darkness and Light, and there are still some of the things with the writing that is just not quite there, but it's interesting. And there's enough promise that I'll keep going with the series. But Of Blood and Fire, just if you were to take it by itself, wasn't quite as good as some of the other books I read this year. Then we've got The Wolf by Leo Carew, and I think this one goes right above Beyond Redemption. I enjoyed it, and I think I'm going to continue the series in 2025. It just didn't leave me with any lasting feelings about it. I mean, it was fun, and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't obsessed with it, and neither did I hate it. Like, it was just a good, solid fantasy book. Then we've got Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and this one, I have toned down how I feel about this book as the year has gone on, but I do think it's an A tier book. I'm going to put it right behind Forgetting Moon. I think I thought when I first read it that it was darn near perfect, and as the year's gone on, I've been like, yeah, I mean, it was good. I think Gillian Flynn is such a good writer of character and dialogue that kind of had me obsessed with it because the character and dialogue work in it was so incredible. But I don't love the plotting all the time. It's just so heavy. So do with that what you will. Next, we've got Dark Age by Pierce Brown. I'm just going to throw this one up in S tier because I loved it. I thought it was so much fun. And not in a, this is very fun, we're having a blast, but like it's kicking me in the face and it hurts, but it's so good kind of way. The final third of Dark Age was just emotional punch, emotional punch, emotional punch, and it was awesome. Memories of Ice is the best book I read all year, so I guess that removes some of the suspense here. It's top of S tier, best book I read. I've talked about it quite a bit here on the channel and on TikTok, but it's just darn near perfect. It's great in almost every way. In fact, it's unimpeachable. If you have an issue with it, it's a skill issue. Dungeon Crawler Carl comes up next. Really enjoyed this one. We're going to go top of A here. I don't know why it's so easy to read, but it is. It's the progression of the characters, and yet it's not so schlocky that you just can't get into it. There's definitely a good amount of schlock in here, but it's that nice happy medium where you can get into it. It's definitely very niche, but you can get into it, and it's fun, and you can turn your brain off and just have a blast with it. Then we've got Words of Radiance. I think I'm going to go behind Forgetting Moon in A tier, because I did really enjoy it. I was not super invested in the characters, and I think I've just decided after this year reading Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, Brandon Sanderson's just probably not for me. It's not the style of writing that I enjoy reading, but it doesn't make it bad. It just means that it doesn't quite land for me the way some other stuff does. The last one we've got in here is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and hooey. Where do you put this one? Because I had a blast with it. I thought it was super fun. And I listened to the audiobook by Ray Porter, which I think is a must if you're going to read this book, because Ray Porter does so much with the text and brings it to life that it's the best. I think Project Hail Mary has to go in A tier as well. It's shaping up to be an incredible year of reading. We're going to go top of A. Top of A for Project Hail Mary. It's so good. I can't recommend that book enough. I think the middle of the year, I was just making video after video saying, yeah, you should go read Project Hail Mary. And everybody talks about it because it's great, but you should go read Project Hail Mary. So let me know in the comments, how do you feel about the tier list? How did I do rating all these books? And while you're at it, if you want to hop in and talk about books with me and a whole community of readers, I've got a link to my Discord server down there in the description. We do a book club on there. We talk about books. We have a blast. And the book that we're going to be reading here in January is Agincourt by Bernard Cornwell. So if you like history, if you like fantasy, you're going to love it.